Hello and welcome to this episode of Off the Radar. I am meteorologist Matthew Huddleston, joined today by meteorologist Rachel Dunsing, and certainly a lot has happened, Rachel, just over the past month.
It has been a crazy month. I was running through the numbers a little bit earlier, and you have these crazy temperature swings where you had record-breaking high temperatures, and then you went to very cold temperatures within 24 hours of each other. I know we kind of expect that during spring, but
transitional period.
My goodness. And I know we say it every year because we have a little bit of recency bias every year, but it was kind of crazy.
It kind of was. And of course, we're going to talk about March now heading into April. April starts the middle half of this week. Also, there have been a ton of meteor sightings just over the past month, really across the entire United States. We're going to talk about that. The warm weather and the early arrivals with it, seeing a lot of flowers and even hummingbirds kind of ahead of schedule across the area. And we ended out talking a bit about hurricane season. I know it's still thankfully weeks and weeks away, but it's never too early to talk about what we might expect this year as far as the pattern that is setting up. But we're going to start off talking about the past 3 months because, as I said, April begins on Wednesday. And so far, the past 3 months have seen a lot of ups and downs, cold temperatures and warm temperatures. Now, the warmest time we have seen so far in 2026 was back on March 11th, all the way almost to 90 degrees, 89 degrees back then. The coldest high, 26, and the coldest low coming back in February of just 11 degrees, one of the coldest lows we've seen in quite some time.
Yikes. I mean, just thinking back on that, with how warm our March ended up being, it seems a little bizarre to think that at one point we were talking about morning temperatures close to single digits, and I believe that morning there were some of us in the single digits, but what's also crazy about that high that was nearly 90, immediately the next day, it was a strong cold front moving through. We were only in the 40s. We were struggling to make it even into the 50s. It was like 44 the next day.
That's amazing to think about, that you can go one day near 90 and the very next day not making it out of the 40s. That's kind of hard to wrap your head around.
It really is a cliche, but weather whiplash is a real thing, and it's such a real term. And every state, every region makes the same joke. If you don't like the weather, wait 20 minutes, it's bound to change. But especially in spring, that is so very true. We always say it's very common to go from crazy warm to crazy cool, and sometimes in like less than 24 hours.
Yeah, and I think that one day that it was 11 degrees in Raleigh, I think I was filling in for you on that morning. I think Siler City saw 1 or 2 degrees, so some places even more bitter than Raleigh was.
Oh, it's awful.
And that was right after I think we saw the snow, the biggest snow that we saw this season. The snowiest day was 2.8 inches back January 31st. The wettest day being February 26th with just over 1 inch in 19 days so far this year with rain. That is actually the second fewest all-time days that we have seen with rain over the first 3 months of any given year. So kind of a dry start to the year too.
Wow, and it goes back to, like, we haven't had a lot of rain. Some of us had a decent amount of snow. So if we were talking about, that day where we had, that single digit morning low temperature in Siler City. Siler City was one of those locations that ended up getting more snow. Remember, we had that awful dry slot that set up right on top of central North Carolina, and it was like the triangle ended up, or mainly Wake County and parts of Johnston County had like you said, maybe an inch or two of snow, 3 inches maybe, while outlying areas had, 8 inches? Something like that.
Some places like that. And the coast really got it once again. Some places seeing a foot plus down towards the coast. So kind of a miss, if you will, here and a lot down towards the coast.
Yeah. And when you have that much snow in place, it can actually make your morning temperatures a little bit colder. So that would make sense that while we were bitterly cold in Raleigh with even just about 3 inches of snow, that places like Siler City that got a little bit more would end up being just a little bit colder.
And, we talked a lot about how cold it was, but actually so far this year we have had 5 record-breaking highs in Raleigh itself. One of those was a tie, but still, it counts as that new record. Back in January of all months, seeing a record of 76. We have had 4 so far just in March, the warmest, of course, being that 89 degrees, and most recently on March 27th, seeing 87 degrees, tying that old record, but 5 record-breaking highs so far this year, and the summer still isn't here yet.
Yeah.
you got to think about it. You hope that like this doesn't continue to be the trend into April, May, and June, and especially the peak heating of the season in July, August, and September. But you never know. It might end up being one of those years that we see multiple more record-breaking days.
I certainly hope not. I agree. I certainly hope not. I remember a couple of years ago, we had the warmest February on record, and it seemed like at least once a week, and that might be an exaggeration, but it certainly seemed like once a week we were talking about breaking high temperature records in February. And then the next month ended up being a little bit cooler. You know, we definitely had some warm days, but we weren't breaking these high temperature records. And in the same vein, we've had Julys where we've been breaking high temperature records, you know, that were years and years old. We're well into the triple digits. And then we'll have one day that's like, oh, yeah, it's kind of normal. Who thought 90 would be kind of normal? The way it all sets up sometimes is just, it's a lot.
You never know what to expect on any given year. And of course, I talked about the 5 that we've seen so far this year in Raleigh, but Fayetteville has actually broken 6, and the most ever in a single year, record highs that is 16 back in 2007 and 1941. So we're still 11 shy of that. A lot of years still to go, but hopefully we don't creep towards that 16 that they saw as recently as 2007.
Yeah, hopefully everything is just sort of early season heavy, that we've broken all the records that we're going to break, and then just leave it at that. And the rest of the season can be normal.
We'll hope for some record cool highs during the summertime.
Yeah, that would be nice, right? That would be such a nice
70s
change.
and lower 80s during the summer. That'd be nice.
Man, if only we could be so lucky.
Cross our fingers, hopefully so. But of course, we're talking about the ups and the downs and temperatures, but it still technically can snow in the winter months. As far as recently, the most recent snow in April is back in 1983, but how about 1915, seeing 10 inches of snow in Raleigh? That is the all-time biggest daily snow total in Raleigh in April. This was from the 2nd and through the 3rd of 1915 in a big area from Johnston County up towards the NC and VA border there, and the purple shaded areas as much as 8 to 10 inches. That's a good snow any time of the year, but especially for April, that's kind of unheard of around here.
Right, and that's kind of what I was thinking too. Like 10 inches nowadays in January or February would be a lot of snow, like you said, let alone April. And North Carolina, it's not all that common, as you've already mentioned, but in other parts of the country across the plains, springtime snow and springtime snowstorms are very common, and it normally happens after an outbreak of severe weather.
Yeah,
because we
cold air
have
coming in.
Yes, we have these really strong systems. The technical term the meteorologists use are called mid-latitude cyclones. Basically, they're the really strong areas of low pressure that come out of Canada. They bring that strong cold front. We warm up ahead of them, and then we have still this kind of winter-like air that's coming out of Canada, pushing this entire system along. And so when you have the sort of wraparound moisture, once the system moves out, you can have strong winds, sometimes tornadoes, and then on the backside of everything, you can get inches of snow, sometimes even a blizzard. So yeah, not super common here, but spring snowstorms, they're a beast.
Yeah, and despite the fact that this snowstorm was more than 100 years ago, there are actually some images from the North Carolina State Archives. Check out this image here in downtown. Tons of slush there on the streets, and in some places blowing snow, blew over power lines. A ton of snow here. But this was, 111 years ago, coming up in a couple of days, seeing 10 inches, double digits back in April of 1915. It's amazing.
That is nuts. And obviously the infrastructure back then is totally different than what we have now.
Yeah.
So, those lines might not fall if we had a situation like this again. But yeah, that's That's ridiculous.
But you think about, too, like the fact that nowadays an inch of snow, even 100 years later, kind of closes us down here. What would it have done back then? 10 inches, no snow plows, nothing like that to kind of wipe it away. I guess you just kind of stay at home.
I guess you just wait it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you just hope that you have enough to, I mean, there were cars around this time back then, not the same kind of cars that we have. So, I mean, I guess is that a benefit of having a horse to get where you need to go? I don't know. I wasn't around in 1915.
Neither one of us. Yeah. And I'll kind of end the snow talk because we are obviously transitioning out of the snowiest period of the year, being January and February. There is that 10 inches back in 1915, but the most recent and the latest accumulating snow we've ever seen was 1983. April 18th of that year, 1.3 inches in Raleigh, and kind of a few other smaller totals after that. But overall, we've only seen 6 in history of measurable snow across the area in April specifically.
So snow haters, that is good news for you.
So it can happen, but it's not likely.
And meanwhile, snow lovers are doing the whole, so you're telling me there's a chance
There
thing.
is, kind of.
Kind of. Probably not this year, but, you know, in the past it's happened.
And of course, no snowflakes falling out of the sky recently, but there have been quite a few meteor showers across the area. These are kind of these unexpected things. We always have some kind of activity falling through space, but kind of an above average sightings just over the past month of March. These are reports through March 29th. All the states here shaded in red have at least a few meteor sightings, maybe not a big fireball or what they saw across Ohio, but still reports in every single state here kind of highlighted on the map.
And that is a lot of states. And obviously we've been hearing a lot more about them, and it's always a bit of, are there more actually falling, or are we just getting more reports of them? It could be a bit of both, for sure. But yeah, we've definitely had a lot of reports lately. And remember, anything that sort of streaks across the sky can be considered that meteor. It doesn't necessarily have to hit the ground or fall through roofs, as we've been seeing a little bit recently. But yeah, there have been a lot of reports.
You know, but some places, as I mentioned, such as Ohio, did have meteorites or meteor pieces actually make it all the way down to the ground. That brought out some meteor hunters, if you will, across that part of the area. Here's a story from Ohio earlier on this month of one man doing just that.
All right, I'm going to record as I pick this up because I'm really excited about it.
A lucky discovery has been made by well-known Cleveland-based photographer Gabe Leidy. He says he's among the first to find a legitimate piece of the meteor that broke apart over Northeast Ohio on St. Patrick's Day.
This thing, for all intents and purposes, looked exactly like what I would expect a meteorite just laying on the ground to look like. It was in a fairly open area. It clearly didn't come from any of the surroundings, and you know, once I got closer to it, I got more and more excited.
He says he made the discovery in Sharon Center in an undisclosed area after searching for about an hour and a half. Quickly, he reached out to a close friend with expertise for confirmation.
I sent a little video clip to him. He sent it out to his kind of nationwide network. And I mean, there was unanimous excitement among all the people who are experts in this type of thing.
There's still plenty of people searching and finding stones that could be connected. They're turning to social media and AI applications for confirmation. But really, there's only one way to be sure.
But if you want to be really sure, you need to talk to an expert, and usually it's a mineralogist, a geologist.
Dr. Brian Redman is the Emeritus Curator of Archaeology at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. He's also the director of Firelands Archaeology, a group that's hosting Artifact ID Day at the French Creek Nature Center in Sheffield this Saturday from 9 a.m. to noon. He says the event aims to focus on ancient tools or arrowheads, but there will be an expert available.
They'd be more than willing to look at the whatever people think might be meteorites. The truth is that usually what people find are not, because they're very rare, but sometimes they do.
Leidy says he knows he's lucky to find something, but loves the childlike wonder created by this cosmic event the most.
That's a big virtue to me in life, is kind of keeping that childish sense of wonder. If you're captivated by life, then, you know, you'll never be bored.
You just think about finding anything like that, kind of a neat treasure hunt across the Ohio Valley.
Definitely really, really interesting. And there are so many meteor showers that are happening at any given time across the world. I'm sure someone's bound to find something.
Yeah, and our next actual scheduled, if you will, meteor shower is later on this month. This is the 21st overnight into early on the 22nd. Likely favorable viewing if we don't have a lot of clouds across the area. The best time for viewing is just after midnight until 5 a.m. and as much as 10 to 20 meteors per hour over that time period.
Yeah, the Lyrid, one of those where we see a few streaking across the sky. But as we mentioned, there are many that go on pretty much at all hours of the day.
Yeah, and there's always something flying through.
Always something flying through. I mean, think about the vastness of space. There's always something happening. Maybe that's a conversation for another time.
Yeah. And of course, we have meteors flying across the sky and also hummingbirds flying across the sky too. We'll talk about the early migration of that and a little early look at hurricane season coming up after the break. Welcome back once again to this episode of Off the Radar. We ended talking about meteors flying across the sky and also hummingbirds on their way too, because the warmer air has kind of gotten here a little earlier than expected. We've seen hummingbird migration and also an early peak in the cherry blossom across the DC area. These pictures from the National Park Service. Beautiful scenes up there with the Washington Monument in the background there, and a lot of people enjoying this over the past week or so. Unfortunately, it is a little bit on the decline now, but still about a week's worth of very nice scenes up there in DC.
And even if it's on the decline, I'm sure that it's still just a wonderful spectacle to be had. So hopefully anyone taking a trip up that way, within the next week or so, we'll still have a good view. Matthew.
Yeah, I'm actually going up to DC later on
say
this
that
week.
that was for you.
Thursday and Friday, so hopefully there's at least one or two trees with cherry blossoms on them, but probably not as nice as it was at one point. But still, it's DC.
Still.
It's spring. It has to be nice.
Oh yeah,
Hopefully.
Absolutely. You'll still have a great time. I'm
Still
sure.
a good time.
Yeah.
Of course, the hummingbird migration, as I've talked about, usually it's not until we get into April that we start seeing them across our portion of the state. This is kind of a rough idea of the averages across the area. As they make their way off towards the north, typically not until the end of April that portions of the Northeast see them, but the latest report from Hummingbird Central shows that there have been a few reports as far north as southern sections of Indiana and Illinois. All the areas there in the red, including much of central North Carolina, has seen quite a few reports just over the past week or so. So the hummingbirds are on the move kind of early for this time of the year.
Wow, I haven't seen any, but I'm not a huge bird watcher. But yeah, that's amazing that they're already making their way north.
We've seen a lot of birds at our house. We haven't seen any hummingbirds quite yet, but maybe one day I'll see one kind of fluttering by the window and say, hey, I can add that report too.
Yeah, I have a lot of, I believe they're wrens and cardinals, sort of the typical birds you see this time of year. I have an app for it because our own Russ Bowen was like, you need to get this app, and it's from Merlin, so it listens to the bird songs and tells you what bird's around, because, I don't know. Why not?
We're officially in our bird watching years of our lives.
I guess so. Is that what happens in your 30s?
I guess so. And of course, we're talking about the earlier than usual warm temperatures, but the average high is actually back to 70 degrees starting on this Sunday. It creeps up 2 degrees every single week after that for the next 3 weeks, and 77 degrees just 4 weeks from this Easter Sunday. So slowly but surely making our way back to average highs near 80 degrees once again. But that likely means humidity is going to be on the rise too. So yes, a lot on the warmer side, but also a little bit on the humid side too.
Happens fast. One day you're enjoying nice spring-like conditions, and the next thing you know,
it's time for that heat and humidity. You step outside the door and you just start sweating immediately.
Yeah, pretty much.
Not the best time of the year, but overall, what you going to do? It is spring after all.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, as we head towards these warmer months, of course, we're talking about the early look at hurricane season. And last year, starting in August, the National Hurricane Center did put out an experimental forecast cone here. The cone itself is still the same, but it has kind of the watches and the warnings integrated with it. This is now starting this year going to be the official cone outlook moving forward.
I actually really like this. I know there's always been a lot of discussion within the weather community, people outside of the weather community who misunderstand what the cone is supposed to be. The cone is only for the forecast of where the center of the storm could go. But if the center of the storm hugs one side of the cone or the other, it could still bring impacts well outside the cone. And so a lot of times I think that gets lost. So the big change that you can see here with the cone, as we've already mentioned, is that we have those watches and those warnings already like laid out on the cone themselves for inland areas, for areas outside of the cone itself. So hopefully if someone is just looking at this image from the National Hurricane Center, they have a better idea of, okay, I'm outside the cone, but I have these watches that are in effect for my location. So I hope people start to understand that a little bit better. And of course, it's part of it is our job too, as meteorologists and communicators, to explain that. And I feel like it's something we always hit on every single year. But we know how it is. Sometimes people are so focused on one thing that in one ear and out the other. Again, it's not attacking anyone. I do the same thing. Ask my husband. But, hopefully that this, gets a little bit better of an idea for folks.
Well, it's always important to remember, too, it's not an impact cone. It is kind of a overall where the center is going to go. So impacts, depending on the storm size, can be hundreds of miles outside of that immediate eye itself.
Absolutely. I had a chief that I worked with at one time. She always said, it's a forecast cone, not an impact cone.
And of course, as we head towards this hurricane season, one bright side, if you will, is the fact that we are slowly transitioning into El Nino. Locally, that might mean cooler and wetter than average conditions across the deep south. We certainly could use those soaking rains, but on the hurricane side of thing, it also means likely a lot more shear out there in the Atlantic. That typically means less in the way of tropical activity, but as we always say, it only takes one storm to cause an impact on any given year.
Yeah, so when we have more wind shear, especially over the main development region, it makes it a lot more difficult for these tropical systems to develop. It is not impossible, it's just harder because that wind shear, whether it's different directions or same direction, it can tear apart these tropical systems. It doesn't like those really strong winds in the mid or upper levels of the atmosphere. So it might start and then the shear comes in and it just rips it apart. So that's why we like El Nino during hurricane season. But as Matthew said, it only takes one. Probably the one that I say the most, just because it is one of the most recognizable, is 1992. 1992 was an El Nino year, and a pretty strong El Nino year. But what hurricane took over headlines in 1992? Hurricane Andrew. It was a Category 5 as it hit the Miami, Florida area a little bit later in the season, might we add. So it was a late start to the season. It really wasn't all that active of a season, but yet we still had, at that time, one of the strongest hurricanes to ever hit the U.S. and that part of the country, and it happened during an El Nino year.
Well, and you're thinking about, too, the fact that just because we have a warmer than usual ocean doesn't necessarily mean more hurricanes. It typically means stronger and faster intensifying hurricanes, sometimes as even they're nearing the coast in 24 hours or less before landfall itself.
Yeah, and this is kind of what we were talking about too with the impact on the tropics. If you don't have a lot of wind shear, those storms can get vertically stacked up and get strong very quickly. And yes, when we do have those warm ocean temperatures, that brings in more energy. So high wind shear during an El Nino year would work to tear everything apart.
And we also hope for a lot of that Sahara dust that obviously anytime you get that much dry air over the immediate tropical zone, it certainly helps to kind of suppress any hurricane activity as long as possible. Hopefully it's months and months and months into hurricane season.
Yeah, normally Saharan dust arrives, I believe, a little bit earlier in the season. It coincides with the West African monsoon, which the West African monsoon can also help start tropical systems. So it's kind of this like weird thing where the waves come off and they can become our tropical systems, but at the same time we have this dust coming off as well. But that dust, ironically enough, tends to slow down. There's not as much being produced and whipped over the Atlantic, normally around late August into early September. What is late August and early September? Normally when we see an uptick in hurricane production. It's not a perfect correlation, but it's a correlation.
And of course, thankfully, hurricane season, because it's still weeks and weeks away, things are nice and quiet, as is typically expected out there in the Atlantic. But quickly, here is a look at the 2026 Atlantic hurricane names. Two names to me stand out on there. Bertha, of course, back in 1996. Bertha struck the coast a few months before Fran did as well. And of course, Isaias back in 2020. It's back on the list once again.
What? I'm trying to remember if there were, what year, because these recycle every... Is it 6 years or 8
years?
Every
unless they
6
get
years.
retired.
So this would have been the 2020 list. So, and 2020 was crazy active.
It was quite the year, yeah.
Yeah, 2020
we went
was
deep into that Greek alphabet.
Yeah, we did. That was, yeah, all of the memories of the 2020 hurricane season are coming back to me now. Yeah, so I bet a lot of these were retired, and I'm just not.
I'm gonna have to go back and take a look too. 'Cause
I know.
I forget about, there were so many storms. They kind of all just kind of ran together.
Do what was? Yeah, I remember most of those. There had to be one that was retired, and I just don't remember.
There had to be. I feel like it was almost not until the Greek alphabet names. Maybe one or two of those got retired. And that's why they use that supplemental list now.
Yeah, because they realize getting that far deep into the Greek alphabet is just
probably not the best idea.
much.
Kind of confuses a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Off the Radar. We see you once again next week at this time as we get deeper and deeper into the month of April. Have a great day.